Welcome back. Climate change remains one of the largest issues affecting our planet. For decades, environmentalists have urged leaders to address these issues and to act now before it's too late. Joining me to discuss climate change in NYC, greenhouse gas emissions, and more is Executive Director of NYC Climate Action, Stephanie Margolis. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now, can you tell me a little bit about your organization?
Yes, the New York City Climate Action Alliance is a nonprofit working with those in the private sector and civil society to help New York City achieve its ambitious climate goals. Essentially, we need to decarbonize, and so we're here to help support everyone along the way so that we can make sure that we are avoiding the devastating consequences of greenhouse gas emissions in our atmosphere.
Now, as I mentioned, climate change is the most critical and urgent issue facing our world, really. However, I think there are many people who are just still very unclear about what that is. Can you explain what climate change is?
Yes, so climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. The shifts may be natural. However, what we've seen, and especially since the early 1800s, is that human activities have been the main driver of climate change, predominantly from the burning of fossil fuels, such as coal, oil, and gas, which produce greenhouse gas emissions, which get trapped in our atmosphere and then heat up our environment.
Okay, so I guess for example, would a really cold day in the summertime, would that be considered climate change?
That, there's no one thing that's considered climate change. A cold day in the summer is not considered climate change. A warm day in the winter is indicative of these larger trends of increasing temperatures that are driven by the fact that it's humans are burning fossil fuels rather than, leveraging our energy sources from renewable energy, such as solar, such as wind. So it's more indicative of larger trends, not one specific day, is indicative of climate change.
Got it. Thank you so much for explaining that. Now, what are some common things we as a society do that contributes to these issues of climate change?
So essentially, a lot of what we do contributes to climate change. Everything from powering our buildings to driving our cars to eating different food to throwing out trash, all of these aspects impact climate change. So when you think of it within buildings, every time you turn on your lights, you're consuming energy. And energy is produced by burning fossil fuels, or it's produced from renewable energy. And so we need to be really mindful about all of the different ways that we consume energy in order to mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Now, I know you mentioned it a few times, and I'm not really sure what this means. Can you explain what fossil fuels are?
Yes, so fossil fuels are different forms of energy. And so, for example, you can burn oil, you can burn coal, you can burn natural gas, and in the process of burning those, you generate energy. And then energy is used within your homes. When you turn on the light switch, you're using energy. When you run your dishwasher, you're using energy. And so we want to make sure, in addition to reducing our energy consumption, we want to make sure that we're also transitioning how we produce energy from fossil fuels to renewables.
Now, how are we seeing the effects of climate change across the globe, but also here in New York City?
So there are a lot of ways that we're seeing the impacts of climate change in our daily lives. First of all, there's increased storms, there's additional flooding, there's greater heat waves. So for example, last summer alone, heat waves killed hundreds of people in the United States, specifically the Pacific Northwest, also in Canada. Floods devastated Germany and China. Wildfires raged out of control in places like Siberia, Turkey, and Greece. And New York City is also feeling the impacts of climate change. In many places throughout the city, there's something that's referred to as sunny day flooding. And sunny day flooding is when it's beautiful outside, blue skies, sun in the sky, yet there is still an inch of water on the sidewalks because the water has come up from the bottom of the ground That's what's referred to as sunny day flooding, and that's because we're not able to drain our water as well because we have increased storms. In addition, last summer, New York City surpassed the previous record for the rainiest hour, not once, but twice. The first time we had Central Park collected 1.94 inches of water within 1 hour. And then just 2 weeks later, we smashed through that record and experienced 3.15 inches of rain in a single hour in Central Park. And that was from Hurricane Ida. And, with that storm, water came flooding into the city. It cascaded down the subway steps, and it completely shut down the system. So in addition to, feeling the devastating impacts of climate change from increased storms, it also has economic impacts. It shut down the subway. Folks weren't able to get to and from work. They weren't able to get home. And so we really need to be paying attention to climate change and doing everything that we can to be mitigating the impacts of climate change.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought that up, the economic impact, because I don't think a lot of people often think about that. Can you tell us a little bit more about why that's actually really important?
Yes. So, for a very long time, there hasn't been that much effort given to climate change because it's always been considered as a future problem, a problem for those in the future to pay attention to. However, there are significant economic impacts of doing nothing. The cost of doing nothing is not that you won't have to spend money now to mitigate climate change in the future, because you will be experiencing significant economic impacts of climate change. Workers might not be able to get to and from work, so you're going to decrease your revenue as an organization. If we're not taking care of the environment, you're going to run into supply chain issues, and so then the costs of goods are going to go up. You're seeing right now the cost of gasoline is rising because we don't have access to an endless supply of natural gas. And so there are significant economic impacts of climate change in addition to environmental and health impacts as well.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that, because I do definitely think there's this idea of what climate change is and why it's important, but I've never heard that aspect before. So I appreciate you sharing that. Now, I understand your organization is addressing how New York City buildings can also contribute to this issue. Can you further explain?
Yes. So we focus specifically on buildings because buildings emit the largest greenhouse gas emissions out of every single sector in the city. In New York City, buildings contribute about 70% of the city's greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation contributes, about a quarter of that. And then the rest of the greenhouse gas emissions come from waste. And so because buildings contribute the largest amount of greenhouse gas emissions to our city, that's really how we're focusing on, we're really focusing all of our efforts there. And the reasons why buildings contribute so much energy is because there's significant energy usage within buildings. There's the burning of fossil fuel on site to heat and to cool buildings. We use a lot of energy in our homes in addition to heating and cooling, from lighting, from what's known as plug loads, which is anything that you plug into an outlet. So your refrigerator is constantly plugged in, your TVs, even though they're not always in use, those are constantly plugged in. And so we're using a lot of energy in our homes. And so we really need to, because we're using so much energy in our homes, that's why buildings contribute so much to the city's overall greenhouse gas emissions. And so we really need to make sure that we're reducing the amount of energy that we can in homes. And by homes, I mean where you live, but also where you work, and also where you shop, and also where you go to school, every single type of building.
Now, I know there have been some efforts to implement change to these buildings, and I think I've actually have seen it myself. Some buildings will have a paper on the door to talk about the energy that's been saved. I've never really looked at it that much before, but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh, this may be related. So can you actually tell me more about that?
Yes, definitely. So the city and the state really, New York City and New York State really do understand the impact of energy consumption within our built environment and have really set nation-leading laws. So at the state level, you have something that's called the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And there are a variety of different metrics and targets associated with the CLCPA to reduce the state's energy consumption and to reduce the state's dependence on fossil fuels. One of the targets associated with the CLCPA is to transition to zero emissions electricity by 2040, which means that we need to be generating electricity not by burning coal or oil or natural gas, but we need to be generating electricity from renewable energy such as wind power, solar power, or geothermal power. So the state has enacted the CLCPA. New York City has enacted something that's known as Local Law 97, which is a first of its kind legislation that sets carbon emission limits for buildings. And so if you're a building that's over 25,000 square feet, you need to stay within the emissions limit that is set for your building based on the use of your building. So whether you're a residential building, whether you're a commercial building, whether you are an industrial building, so your building will have a cap on the amount of emissions that you can, on the amount of carbon that you can emit, and you must stay within it or face a fine. And then Kibin, like you mentioned, there's also the energy grade. So we're trying to raise awareness of how much energy you're using. So you can see some buildings that have an A grade, which means that they are consuming energy as efficiently as possible. You have some buildings, and the majority of buildings actually have a D grade. And so it's a way to help you, understand compared to your peers how you stand. And then from there, you can work with experts, you can work with consultants, engineers, architects to figure out ways that you can reduce your energy consumption and your carbon emissions from your buildings.
Wow, that's really cool. I never really knew exactly why it was there, so it's really cool to hear why I'm actually seeing that. Now, the Supreme Court recently curbed the EPA's power to limit greenhouse gas emissions. Why do you think there's so much pushback when it comes to protecting our planet?
So, what it really comes down to is people are just afraid of change. For so long, we had been burning fossil fuel from coal plants, and there is concern about industries dying. And the fossil fuel industry is really very well funded. And fossil fuel technology is really embedded within our systems and our society. However, we have proven that energy efficiency and a transition to a clean energy economy really works both economically as well as in terms of health impacts. And so we really just need to continue educating everyone on the issue so that we can continue to move forward. And while it's frustrating for me that change will be incremental, I feel very confident that we have very smart people in the industry working on this, and that we will continuously educate younger generations, as well as politicians, as well as those in power, as well as CEOs of organizations, as well as members of the board of residential buildings, to really educate everyone so that we can move forward with the right actions to mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Well, I definitely learned so much today, and I really appreciate that. Can you just let everybody know where they can go to learn more about the work that you're doing?
Certainly. So you can visit our website. We are the New York City Climate Action Alliance. Our website is newyorkcityclimateaction.org. We also have a Twitter account. Our handle is NYC Climate Act. We also have an Instagram page. Our handle there is Change the Climate NYC. There are also a lot of other nonprofits in the city focused on energy consumption. The city itself, the Mayor's Office of Sustainability. The state also has great resources. And so there are lots of opportunities for you all to get involved if you're interested. And I hope that you do.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back.